Name's Mel. My pronouns are she, her, as go in Scotland.
Cool. And I'm Annie, she, her as well. And I'm here in beautiful Hong Kong.
Awesome. I'm gonna repeat mine as well since I forgot to record earlier. I'm Shasta, mine are she, her, and they, them. And I'm really excited to get to have, like I said, such a global conversation today. I didn't realize we were so spread out.
Yeah, I'm excited too. It is pretty nuts that we're all coming in from different time zones. It's so funny looking at. I can tell it's still day where both of you are, but
Yeah.
Getting the sun rising now. Okay. Well, let's get started. I'm going to jump around a little bit so that when we come back to the more general questions, we'll have Rose with us.
great.
So let's start with some more BiHistory focused things. Down. So, in your opinion, what is the most inspiring part of BiHistory and why? And this applies to all of you guys.
I think for me, the most inspiring thing is just knowing that this identity or people who have experiences that would be considered kind of under the bisexual umbrella have existed for a really long time. That had a really big impact on me because I think I spent a long time feeling like my identity was kind of less, like I didn't really deserve a space in LGBT plus spaces, and then learning like the role that bi people have had throughout LGBT activism and throughout history, and just that we have existed for a really long time was just very powerful for me and helped me really, like, I guess, come to terms with my identity and find it something that I could be proud of.
I agree with that. Learning about literally anyone else in history who was bi, it's always so surprising because it's not something that typically you'd find with someone who is gay or lesbian or transgender or one of the more, some people would say, definite types of identities, which personally I don't agree with. They tend to be like more forward about it. They tend to be more out, like we have in some of that research we've seen recently. And discovering that a lot of my favorite media creators, a lot of my favorite just creatives in general over the past like 30 or 40 years, and even going back into several hundred years past, were bisexual was mind-blowing, and it made me feel much more heard and seen. And do you have any parts of BiHistory that you find particularly inspiring, Annie?
I mean, just to echo what you guys said, it's very validating to know that people have been bisexual for as long as they've been sexual, um, and yeah, I wish I wish I had known sooner. I wish I had known that fact sooner.
Agreed. All right, and then what has been the most surprising part of delving into the history of the bisexual experience?
I think when I started doing the research, I expected to find a lot more kind of, I guess, negative things. Like I thought I'd have to do lots of kind of understanding and exploring of like people having really negative experiences, and obviously that does come up. But I think what I've found is that, you know, when you find someone who either identified as bisexual or we would now think of as bisexual if they had that term available to them, is that I think for a lot of people it just was their lives, you know. It was just something that they wanted and lived just as it is now, you know. It's just like an authentic part of them. And that again was also quite validating and freeing, because I think a lot of conversations around identity and bisexuality now get very caught up in you know, who's allowed to identify in what way, and kind of conversations that are important but I think sometimes get kind of circular in a way. Like we kind of just have the same conversations over and over again, and that's something else that I kind of learned, was that a lot of the conversations we have now have already been had. You know, if you read books from like the 80s and 90s, like people were exploring those ideas, and that's reassuring. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Do you think in becoming so identity focused like we have in the LGBTQ community as of late, since the 80s, since we started adding more terms in, do you think we might have lost any of that authenticity, or do you think it adds to our experience?
I think that it's really useful to have lots of words and different ways to identify. And I think that a really important thing for me about my identity is that it's never my place to tell anybody else like how they should or shouldn't identify. Like I've had that happen to me and it's really not nice. Like, and I think they kind of feel the need to like break their identity down to like a really granular level. I like the idea for me that I don't have to explain that like maybe today like I'm attracted to a woman or like a non-binary person, and then tomorrow I might be more attractive to like a man. Like I don't need to break that down in any other way, but maybe for someone else that's really useful to be able to do. But yeah, I think just kind of a greater acceptance of fluidity even within the terms that people want to use to identify themselves is a really positive thing that I see happening at the same time as like conversations about what words mean what things and whether people want to use them to identify.
I agree. I've been part of the community for or aware that I was part of the community for about 2 or 3 years now. And in my short foray into all the different conversations that we have, I think the most supporting and uplifting thing we can do for people is to be and let be, and just let people, if it's validating for you, you're not hurting anybody else, say you are what you are. And it's no one else's place to argue with you on that stance. And then how did you get your first taste of LGBTQ plus history?
See the questions over and I can't remember like a lot of these things. I can't remember, and I think that means that it wasn't happening. Like maybe someone can remember like years, maybe we had a lesson in school where someone mentioned someone who was like famous and part of the LGBT community, but I don't remember that happening. And I think that's because that just stuff kind of just wasn't very available. But I think Instagram was really important to me because I saw a lot of Instagram accounts like LGBT history, all of the kind of ones that you think of when you talk about like queer history on Instagram, and I can give you names if you don't know of them, if anyone wants. But yeah, I found that really good because it was really accessible. Like I could just be sitting on my phone learning, but then that's when I kind of felt frustrated that like people would only talk about like David Bowie and nobody else, and I feel like, okay, well, is that really the person we want like representing our community in the first place? And also like there's so much more, come on, like it's just a bit lazy. So that's kind of what motivated me to want to explore BiHistory on Instagram. But I think Instagram is definitely the place where I see like most discussion and sharing and research being done, much more than in like any other part of my life, unless I was gonna like sit down and read a book, and then that feels quite like one-sided, it's just me sitting and reading rather than having like a conversation.
I agree. I think especially with the bisexual community, a lot of the like media heroes that we saw and heard talked about first were these like amazing rock stars from the 80s, but at the same point in time, the LGBTQ community struggles with nicotine use, with drug use, with alcohol use. We're more susceptible to all different types of addiction, and having these role models be people who also had a really horrible time with substances, who were abused by the people around them. It's not a very inspiring story, aside from the fact that they rose to stardom, but it's hard to stay out of the things that we're really susceptible to when you're in that mindset and in that space.
I should clarify, actually, the reason I don't like David Bowie is he had a relationship with a really young woman. I'm not being judgy about his like lifestyle as a rock star, like fair enough. But yeah, sorry, I didn't want to get into that because it sucks. But that's why I find it so frustrating. But yeah, sorry.
That's true. That's also not something that I would really like to support. And then you mentioned some Instagram accounts that were really meaningful for you. Do you have any role models or media heroes in your youth that helped you better come to terms with your own identity, either then or looking back now?
Yeah, I find that difficult because I don't think there were many. And I think the reason that, like, I was trying to remember the first time I heard someone bisexuality being used, and I can't, which is really annoying. But it was probably like when I was on Tumblr, like age 19, it was quite late on. It wasn't a conversation that was being had in my education at school or in like history. Like or in sex ed. Like nobody was talking about those people. And I think like now, you know, you've got people like Janelle Monáe talking about being pansexual or fluid. I remember, this might be like a really specific UK reference, but I don't know if you folks ever watched the Great British Bake Off, but there's a baker from there called Ruby Tando, who's really cool and bi, and I remember finding out she was bi and just being like really hyped because she just seemed like a very normal, I mean obviously beautiful and cool person, but yeah, that just felt like a very like affirming representation to just like have that be such like obviously a huge part of her identity, but you know, she was there to bake cake, and then you'd find out actually that like, oh, she has something in common with me, and that was really nice and affirming, and in a context that like, you know, my parents watched that show, like yeah, that was a very positive moment for me, I think.
I agree. That's my favorite thing about finding out people are bi, and it's kind of an added bonus, I guess, of our relative invisibility, is that when you find out someone is bi, it's usually not the first thing you find out about them. They're going about living their lives, and then it's a side note. And even though, like, for me, it is such a big part of my identity, I would rather people treat my identity as, you know, just a side note like they would anyone else. What about you, Annie? What was the first taste that you can remember getting of LGBTQ history?
I was also trying to think about this today, and there's definitely not a moment where the word bisexual jumped out of me and I was like, what is that? But I definitely didn't hear about it in sex ed. I know that for sure. I'm pretty certain that it must have been in regard to some pop culture moment, like maybe Katy Perry was maybe that was it. I do remember my mom accused someone of being metrosexual. That like sticks in my mind because I was like, how does she know about that? And I knew about metrosexuality because that was a buzzword in the early aughts, and I knew about bisexuality by then, so it had to have been before then. But I couldn't put a pin in it. I just know it was between the ages of 12 and 14.
That's been my experience too. It's all fuzzy and confusing, and I don't have any definite memories of knowing anyone bi, hearing anyone was bi until I myself said I was bi. And then, you know, the community opened up, and it would be great if that wasn't the case. If I'm in Marin right now, right next to San Francisco, and my friends who I've made here, who grew up here, were talking about how they had someone who was gay come in and talk in just a big school assembly about what their daily life like was as a gay person, and that it wasn't made out to be some glamorous, like, it's good and bad in my mind that being part of the LGBTQ community has become such like a buzzworthy thing and has become in a way like in fashion now, because a lot of the things that, like, when I first started entering the community very recently, I feel like especially bisexual people have been told that their identity was a phase, that they're doing it for attention, that they're doing it to attract a certain gender identity. And I feel like from the conversations that I've had with a lot of young LGBTQ individuals lately, that they're feeling that way, not just about the bisexual identity, but about a lot of different identities too now. And it makes it really difficult for those of us who really truly want to have some authenticity and some meaning to our identity, because if it's popular to be bisexual or popular to be made unique in this way, then it can make it feel a bit less meaningful when you see that tons and tons and tons of people are using these words, and tons and tons and tons of people are talking about it when they might not necessarily understand what our experience is. And on the note of any role models or media heroes in your youth, when you first started to enter the LGBTQ community, who are some people that you found really impactful?
I remember learning about Brenda Howard, who I think now it's funny because when people are like, so the other day I tweeted something on the BiHistory account and someone replied and was like, have you heard of Brenda Howard? And I'm like, what do you think I do? Of course I have. But, you know, I realize like people who don't spend all their time reading stuff online about bisexual history, it's like probably not as well known. But she is basically the reason that we have Pride. She created the St. Christopher Day Parade, which then became the Pride March, and she did that while she had a husband. And so yeah, now it feels a bit of a like almost lazy reference for me. I'm like, I should have more obscure and like unusual bi people to like bring out when people ask me that kind of stuff. But I think she did amazing work, not to discredit that at all. I'm being a bit flippant there, obviously. But yeah, she did like such amazing work, and it's such a like strong reminder to me that if I ever feel like I don't have a right to have like a space in an LGBT space, then I'm like, well, if Brenda Howard was out there like creating Pride, it's probably fine if I'm like sitting quietly in this room, actually.
That's true. I think especially as soon as you get out of the really like cishet Eurocentric type of history that a lot of us are taught, then once you have been in that space for a while, it's hard to remember that a lot of people around you don't know that history, and a lot of people maybe have only heard about Freddie Mercury, and that's the only experience they have with any sort of like historical figure that was part of the community. And that's great. Love all of the contributions he gave to music, but it's really impactful and it's really inspiring to hear about actual political figures and figures in industry and figures who were just like that, either directly advocating for the community or just going about their daily lives as a bisexual person.
I think for me also, it's really, I try really hard not to just like look at American history, because that's where like there's more information about it, more resources. So it's like if I want to just quickly do a post for the BiHistory account, then I can do that. But if I want to like challenge myself and write about like even just like UK history, or, you know, God forbid we look away from both the UK and America, like it gets even harder. And I do try and do that because, yeah, I think like what you're saying, you know, there's so many stories out there about people who did important and amazing stuff, but because we're like so trained to focus on like the history of the UK and America, like it gets lost.
Definitely. Still waiting on Rose. And we talked a little bit about your guys' experience with sex ed. Personally, I came from a very, very traditional Christian community that a lot of people would view as very kind of fringe in its personality. I don't know if that's a word. But my sex ed didn't even go into any sort of pleasure, didn't go into any sort of anything other than cisgender and heterosexual type of identity. Sex is for babies, and here's a uterus, we're going to scare you with the birth video and separate the girls and the boys and all that type of stuff. So I personally didn't get any sort of education on sex in general as anything other than reproductive. So it sounds like you guys didn't have much of an experience with inclusive sex ed either. So how did your early education related to sex ed and different kinds of relationships seems like not serve you related to your experience as a bisexual person?
I came from a very similar background. I went to Catholic school until I was 14. And they didn't teach you about pleasure or pleasure being a part of sex. And they also separated boys and girls, and didn't even know that queer people existed really until till I was almost out of there. So that was bad. It was really very bad. I went into the horniest part of my life not knowing what sex was, basically. So totally unprepared and very confused, me not having the same feelings about the same people as it seemed like my friends were. Would have loved some context for what I was feeling, I think. So I actually wrote to my high school to see my high school sex ed was a little more informed, but again, no focus on pleasure. We did talk about, how to not get STIs and, use birth control, which they definitely didn't teach in Catholic school. But I did write to my high school and ask if they had, what I was mainly concerned about was there was also no education when it came to consent. So I wanted to check in this year and see if that was at least part of the curriculum now, and they assured me that it is. So that is a great weight off of my mind.
Yeah, that's true. That's part of a sex that a lot of people don't talk about. I've never heard a sex ed class talk about consent whatsoever, and that would be so impactful, I think, just to address it from any type of authority figure when you're that young, that it matters, that it's there, that this is what it looks like.
Yeah, definitely.
What about you, Mel?
So I went to school in a rural part of England in the southwest, and I think that means I was like maybe 5 years behind what happens in cities. Like when I talk with my friends about what my life was like, it definitely feels like I was like here. And I think we had relatively good sex ed in the sense that like it wasn't a Catholic school, so they talked about like contraception, and we were shown so many like PowerPoint presentations about what STIs look like. Like that's my overall like horrible, like really intense pictures of like people who've had like, like 1800s levels of like syphilis and stuff. Makes me angry because I'm like, maybe you should have just been like, here's what you do if you get an STI, go to the doctor and it will actually be fine. Whereas obviously they were just like, we're going to scare you into never having sex, which doesn't work. But yeah, there wasn't any talk about like sexuality or pleasure. It was very heteronormative, very cisgender. But I think also at that time, like we did have the internet, so I was getting my sex education from the internet as well. And I think it was at a time of very like hypersexual Tumblr kind of like teenage years where everybody's just like talking about the kind of porn they like to watch and like all that stuff. And I think that was a counterpoint, obviously quite extremely different to what was happening at school, but I don't think it was necessarily much better. Like it still wasn't, it was kids talking amongst themselves. Like there was no resources that we had available to us that were actually like giving us the advice we needed. And I think like what you were saying about like consent and just like all of that stuff would have been really good. And I hope that that's what happens now, but I don't know. It might not be.
Yeah, it's hard. There's no cut and dry type of legislation about here's exactly what you have to have in sex ed. That type of thing would be so incredibly difficult to pass, I think, in a lot of areas.
In Scotland, we recently had, I can't remember exactly what it is, but it's like legislation saying that kids have to be taught about the existence of LGBT people, which I think is amazing. And I love Scotland.
Oh, Scotland.
Yeah, Scotland's cool.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think my follow-up question was, what changes would you find significant to make in these programs? And I definitely think we need to have all different types of LGBT identities part of sex ed and consent part of sex ed. Is there anything else you guys think would be particularly useful?
I mean, I get the feeling that that a lot of this is taught because adults don't really know much about it. Or, a lot of adults don't know much about it. Or they know about it, but they don't want to talk about it. It's taboo to them. I would really like to have some part of the sex ed curriculum taught by a queer person. I know that's a long shot, but it would be great.
Yeah, there's I also do some work in pediatric like alternative cognitive states, and one of the kind of catchphrases that I heard was from the Autism Self-Advocacy Network that says nothing about us without us. And I think that would be, a great thing to keep in mind when we're making legislation about anything, when we're talking about any subject. You should have someone there who has had that experience and who understands how to talk about it, because otherwise the misinformation will be spread far and wide.
Yeah, exactly.
Alrighty, and then onto a bit more of a fun question. The other Pride officers and I personally identify with and regularly participate in a lot of things that are stereotypically bisexual, like cuffing our jeans and shaving parts of our head, and socks and sandals and quirky grandparent-esque outfits. Are there any stereotypes that you find pleasure in participating in, and why?
I love angry girl music. Yeah. Is that a stereotype? It's good music.
Yeah.
I don't know, I haven't found any clear, like, this is bi person music stereotypes, but I think there's a lot of internet jokes out there about what we all listen to and consume.
Yeah.
What about you, Mel?
The bisexual bob is a big part of my life. Whenever anyone sees a picture of me without a bob, they always get really freaked out and like, who is that person? Also my denim jacket that I'm like, this is obviously a very tiny sadness in the context of some really serious international stuff, but like I'm sad that I won't get to wear my denim jacket out because it rains like here, and we are in the like 3 weeks of the year where I could be wearing it, but
Can't go outside. I definitely agree with that. I used to have hair all the way down past my butt, and as soon as I cut it super short, and it's been super short ever since. And anytime I show anyone a picture of me with super, super, super long hair, they're like, that's not me. Hi, Rose. We are introducing by our name, our pronouns, and where we're coming in from.
Cool. My name is Rose. I'm a co-host of Hello Goodbis. Pronouns are she and her, and I'm coming in from Brooklyn, New York, hot off a work meeting.
Oh my gosh, Rose, I forgot to say I was a co-host of Hello Goodbis. I needed to get that plug. I'm so stupid.
It's like you don't even care about the podcast.
Where's your marketing skills?
Yeah, yep.
We're talking right now about any bisexual stereotypes that we personally like to participate in.
Tucked shirt.
Yes.
Definitely. Being into more than one gender, hot stereotype. I think I hit all of the, if you like this artist, you're bi, like musicians.
That's what I said.
Yeah, like every single one, I'm like,
Love it. And then into the less kind of fun side of things, are there any stereotypes that you've had like pushed onto you that you found particularly hurtful, and why?
Definitely going out with women who were not interested in dating bisexual people. So getting a lot of like, oh, well, if you've been with a man, I'm not really interested in dating you at all. And I was like, we haven't even met yet. I don't understand how this came up in conversation. But that was something that I had never experienced before, dating like male identified people. No one had ever been like, well, have you been with anyone besides my people? Because I don't know if I can handle that. So I was startled to find out that there's this kind of like a biphobia that exists within the queer community.
That was very surprising to me as well. I remember I heard about that just a few days before I went to my first queer bar. Very exciting. And it was almost exclusively female identifying people there. And I remember feeling really terrified about telling anyone I was bi. And it felt so hurtful to feel like I was just getting welcomed into this community, just being like beginning to be part of this new identity of mine. And all of a sudden I wasn't welcome yet again. So I definitely agree that that's so hurtful. Like,
yeah, it's just,
do you not see?
Yeah, it's just something you're not expecting if you haven't been warned about it. But it's you, and it's not all people. It's not like everyone in either side.
Yeah. In my experience, it's been very few people who've been outwardly like, you're bi, I don't want to talk to you.
Agreed. Yeah, most people were like, okay, let's go out, whatever.
What about you, Annie and Mo? Are there any stereotypes that you found particularly hurtful in the past?
Yes. Just that, you know, all bisexual people are experimenting. They're not yet decided, you know, but they will make a decision at some point. It's just frustrating.
Yeah, like why would there be an identity for someone liking non-binary male and female presenting bodies if it didn't exist? We wouldn't be struggling so hard to get ourselves recognized if it wasn't an actual identity that like totally matters.
Yeah, it's frustrating.
Do you have any, Mel, that you'd like to share?
Yeah, this is like very specific to something that I've had happen to me. You know, it's not the worst technology at all, but sometimes people think just because I have a boyfriend that I'm waiting for a really sexy woman to come along, and then I won't love my boyfriend anymore and I will run off with which like I find really rude because like I chose to be with my boyfriend, you know, that's a choice I've made. I'm not just like shacking up with the patriarchy until something better comes along. Like, that's my partner. I am still bi, all of that stuff. But I think some people still feel like they should just have a go anyway and see if maybe I'm interested in cheating on my boyfriend, which I'm not. And yeah, I just found it difficult because I think part of like why it's so important to me to like talk about my bisexuality is I feel like I do have that privilege, obviously, of like being able to like talk to people about who my partner is and go outside with my partner and hold hands and stuff. And I feel like I have more emotional energy then to do like the activism stuff. So that's like one of the reasons it's so important to me to do the stuff that I do, is because I feel like I have a bit more space than maybe other people might do who don't have that situation. And then when people come along and are like, do you really like your boyfriend though? I'm just like, oh, this is so annoying. Like, I'm just trying to be bi over here in my monogamous relationship. Calm down.
I'm dating him, aren't I? I have that exact same experience since I was coming out right around the time that when I started coming out, I was in a relationship with a man. And in the process of me beginning to come out, I stopped dating him and started taking some time to just date whoever I wanted and actually give myself the permission to date a woman if I so choose. And at that point in time, I was also falling in love with another man. And now I'm dating him, and I found that I have that experience pretty frequently, that even with some of the people that he and I know and that knew me before him and I ever started dating and saw our entire love story begin to unfold, just the fact that I was waiting and I was being patient and I was trying to ensure that I felt like I got to experience what I wanted to experience and I got to be the person that I am before, you know, shacking up with someone I could possibly settle in with. They didn't trust me because I was bisexual, and they're like, oh, she's dating women, so she probably doesn't like me that much. And it was really hurtful for him too, because he was getting all these messages from me that I was so interested, and everyone else was telling him she's bi, so watch out. It was very hurtful.
It's so interesting because I think no matter when you're bi, there's this weird experience that no matter what you're doing, people are assuming you're wanting the other. So even like, I feel like this is, I've never articulated this before, but like a fear that I'm like, I am currently dating a woman and I'm like, oh no, I also hope our relationship lasts forever and is perfect forever and we're fantastic. But should that not be the case, and if we break up, I'm like, oh no, what if we were to break up, are people gonna be like, well, that's because you're really straight and you're really interested in women, versus like, And I'm sure there are people who like I was in a relationship with a man for 6 years, and I'm sure there are people who are like, well, yeah, the reason that didn't work out is because she's gay. Like, I am so sure there are people out there who, even if they don't articulate it, have that thought. And it's just, we're in a weird one foot in two camps, and both of those camps are kind of like, yeah, but really? Like, no matter what you do, there's going to be people who think you have other like motives going on to what you're doing. And, you know, there's no stopping people. We can only try to educate.
Mm-hmm. Me and my other friends who are bisexual, like tapping into that like sneaky bi stereotype in a joking way. We'll come up and surprise each other.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's scoot back up to the beginning of our question sheet. When and how did you all learn about bisexuality? Go Mel, Annie, Rose.
Cool. So I don't remember exactly. I think I mentioned that like a bit, that yeah, it's quite hazy for me. But I do remember, so like the clear memory that I have is I remember listening to a podcast when I was on a holiday with my parents. And it was like a man talking about this thing called gay anxiety. And I was like, oh my God, that's what I've got. Cool, sorted. So then went for like another like year or so of my life just being like, everybody wants to kiss their beautiful female friends. It's just anxiety, it's fine. And I'm like, gosh, if only I'd known there was a word for that, it would have really helped a lot of like just mental effort. But I'm okay with that. Like, I think one of the things I like about who I am now is that I've done all of that kind of learning about myself and had to put in that like extra effort to get to a point where I'm like not interested in apologizing for my identity, and like I feel like I understand it. So like, silly and annoying as that was, like I guess it's kind of worth it.
Yeah, like I said earlier, I don't remember when I learned the word. I learned it was an option long after I was already sleeping with women and men, and really did not want it for myself because I, like so many biphobic people before me, saw it as a total cop-out. And I was like, I need to choose a side, men or women. This bisexuality stuff is too wishy-washy. So apparently I had learned about it at some point before then and decided that it was bad, which is crazy. So I don't know when I learned it, but I knew it was bad, you know, when contemplating my queer identity.
Yeah, I also feel like I don't remember the first time that I heard the term bisexual, but when I was 12, I went to anthropology and archaeology camp. What's up? But I made a really good lifelong friend there. And her mother, I remember going to her house for a sleepover for the first time and meeting her mom's girlfriend. And I was like, okay, cool. Like, lesbian. Got it. And granted, I'm 12. So like I'm not like very woke. I'm like, okay, that's a lesbian. And then later on in life, she's like, oh yeah, now my mom's like dating this guy, blah, 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 blah. And like, my mom dated men when she was younger. And I was like, okay, I'm not a lesbian, but I don't think I was like bisexual. Like, I think I was just like, okay, like somewhere in between these worlds. And I think that's maybe because like media representation of bisexuality was always this like not a real thing. Like at some point I had absorbed, especially like being my developmental years being like in the 90s, where it was like girls are like drunk bi for male attention and guys are bi as a like stepping stone, and those were the key narratives. So I was like, okay, well, like bisexuality doesn't exist, but there is this kind of way to be with like, you're not a lesbian and you're not straight, but I don't quite know what that is. And then I think once I started dating after my really long, serious relationship, I was like, well, I know that I want to date more than just men. So like, I don't know, it just started to feel right. I don't remember the first time that I was like, oh, well, that's because I'm bi. Like, I don't remember the first time. Maybe on the podcast was maybe the first time that I actually used the term instead of saying like, oh, well, I just like, I'm dating, going out with this person, I'm going out with this person, I'm going out with this person.
Name for the podcast before.
You came up with the name for the podcast.
So Annie's the fun master. Okay.
No, I'm not. I do not take responsibility for that.
This question was one that was submitted by our members, and when I was looking through it, her follow-up was, did you Google if I'm gay? I certainly did. And I had that exact same experience. I never had any clear defined, especially since growing up in a super, super religious community, there was never even a clear defined time where I was like, I'm gay. I had that question, like, am I gay? I don't know. There were a lot of pretty girls in my school, but most of them were mean to me, so I didn't like them. And the first time that I ever thought that I was bi, or even entertained that notion, I had been in undergrad for years, and I was friends with people in our Queer Straight Alliance club, and like hadn't even questioned my sexuality for a long time until a bisexual person started pursuing me. And she was female, and it was so confusing for me. So like, no, I'm not interested in this person, but what if I was? Like, was that something that I would want to do? And I remember sitting in the car with my other friends from the dorm in the Taco Bell drive-thru, and I was looking across the street at some hedges, and then I was like, I'm bi. That's just it. It was the weirdest moment, but in that moment I knew, and I never went back. But I feel like a lot of bisexual individuals have that same experience where it's fuzzy. We've always been told that it's such a confusing thing, and in my experience, the stereotype that we're all confused is just the fact that we don't have any clear information. So of course it's a confusing time. Like, who wouldn't be confused if you never had any clear messaging on if you're not lesbian, if you're not straight, if you're not gay, if you're not straight, what are you? No one tells you. So forced confusion. And then did it take you some time to identify and accept as bi, or was it an easy thing?
I think it definitely took me a while. I think there was a lot of like personal understanding, and then I got to a point where I was like, okay, yeah, I think I know what I am. And then I tried to like join in with the LGBT community, and I tried that at uni. Didn't really feel like it was a space for me, which I don't think is like actively their fault at all. I think like they were a bit like, oh, a bi person, and I was a bit like, I don't know if I'm ready to be here. So like that, you know, not blaming them at all. And then when I moved up to Glasgow, like again, kind of wanted to be part of the community, and I am, but have had moments where like that has not been, like I've been made to feel like maybe I shouldn't be in spaces, or like I'm allowed to be in spaces, but only if I don't say anything, you know, keep my head down, that kind of thing. And I think that kind of triggered like a kind of like second coming out in a way, like where I had to actually like get to a point where I was like actively proud of who I was, and felt that like I had a right to be in a space and had a right to like contribute. And then even started thinking about like maybe there should be like bi specific spaces, which is like not something I'd ever thought of as like something that maybe I needed. And then kind of have started to realize like maybe that is like a really important thing too, because then people have spaces to talk about this kind of stuff. So yeah, that's kind of how it went for me.
What about you, Annie?
Yeah, it was definitely a gradual process for me. Like I said, the word bisexual, like Rose mentioned, from the time I grew up in, had a lot of cultural connotations that I just didn't like. And it took a long time for me to realize those were connotations that straight people had put on bisexual people, things that were not innately bisexual. So I identified as gay for most of college, and at the end there kind of realized that probably wasn't the most accurate descriptor. But it wasn't until a few years out of college that I started dating a bisexual man and kind of got more comfortable with that word at that point. And yeah, and made my peace with it then.
And you, Rose?
I'm not sure about everyone else's timeline, but I'm a like comer outer. I was like turning 30. It was only 2 years ago. I feel like I had always known, like I knew for sure I was into men because I grew up in a heteronormative society where it's like, yes, you will be pursued by men and you should be, you know, pursuing men. But I was also like, but we're all in agreement that like women are beautiful and we want to be kissing our friends, right? Like that's totally normal. And then I knew that I wanted to date not just men, but actually like owning the term bisexual and using it, I felt like I was a total imposter. I had the worst imposter syndrome. Like, even I remember like being in a car with Annie and when we were driving to that bike ride and like talking about a date that I had gone on with a woman, and Annie like then also mentions like dating women in college, and I was like, oh no, what if she finds out that I'm not really bi enough or like not really gay enough or whatever? Like, what if she finds out that I haven't slept with a woman yet and then she's gonna think I'm fake? Or like, oh no, like when's the last time that I made out with a woman? Can I like slip this into a story to be like, I really am, don't you worry. So I think there's like an idea, well, I don't know if everyone has this idea, but I had an idea that like action equaled validity. And I think that's untrue and completely unfair to people who are like, well, I'm in a happy monogamous relationship with one person. So I'm not like actively showing my bisexuality and my ability to like love multiple genders. So that kind of took a lot, honestly. Like, I don't think I felt valid and good until I was like, I have a huge crush on this girl. Like, we're going on dates, things are happening. And then I was like, looking back, I'm like, it's so silly and so obvious to me now that like, that's not what made me bi. Like, this always existed within me, but it truly took me like getting romantically involved with a woman before I was like, okay, I can start. I feel good. I feel all right doing this.
I agree. A lot of my friends and I who are bisexual have that exact same like action equals validity kind of difficulty that we went through. And we all talk about the imposter syndrome that we go through specifically related to the LGBTQ community. Because in those couple months I mentioned between dating man and dating man, where I was dating women and didn't immediately find one that I fell in love with, I was like, I've fooled everyone. They all now think I'm bi, and I just want to date men because there's this one guy that I love. And even though I'm dating women, I still love him. So that means something is wrong with me. And yeah, it took a good month out of those 3 months for me to just understand that having sex with a woman doesn't make me any more bi than I already was. And I wish that was something that I knew earlier too, because yes, it would have been great to have started dating women earlier, but being able to date women without that preconceived notion would have made it so much more comfortable. And I wouldn't have felt like I needed to rush anything. And then, have you all seen a shift in the public perception of bi people in the past few years?
I think more people are aware of it as an identifier, which I think is really good. It's tricky because I think, you know, sometimes there's conversations about like people who kiss their friends on nights out, or women who kiss their friends on nights out, like, are they bi? And I'm like very much of the attitude that I just think, like, if you want to be bi, if you want to experiment, like, good. We need to have space to like chill out a bit and like not hold these like rigid ideas of what you have to do before you can like either think about your sexuality. Like, you don't have to read 5 books about what it means to be queer to like think about kissing a girl if you're a girl, you know. And I think that hopefully, I think we are moving towards that kind of attitude of like being more accepting. And but then I think also there is like a lot of infighting and discourse happening all the time, which sometimes makes me feel a bit like sad, because I think like there's so much positivity and community and activism that happens like when you get bi people together, or when bi people are part of like the wider LGBT community. And I like would prefer to like for me, that would be like what I would want to focus on in terms of like what bi people are up to. But I think if you're like on Twitter, sometimes we're also just shouting at each other, which is a shame. But yeah, no, I think like if, you know, you asked my mom what bisexuality was now, she'd probably have a better idea of it than she would have done 5 years ago, which is a good thing for sure.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it has changed, especially in the past 5 years. What I personally have noticed changed a lot in the last 5 years is people's perceptions of bi men. I think that by the time I came out as bisexual, this perception of women who were bisexual for attention had passed, thank goodness. But there was still this conception of bi men as men, yeah, like Rose said, using it as a stepping stone to coming out as gay. And I've noticed that that has started to change recently. Probably not fast enough for anyone's liking, but I think it is changing.
Yeah, I would say, I don't know if the dialogue in the queer community has changed, or if I'm just like hunting out by people from a broader spectrum of identity, like overlapping identities, who all tend to be like, I mean, if you're bi, or if you're just like a queer person who's interested in like an open queer conversation, it's less like gatekeeping, and more inclusive and like understanding of bisexuality. So like, I mean, I can't say that 5 years ago I was like super plugged into queer media at all, because I was just like, I'm straight, so that's not my space, I can't go in there. But I mean, maybe even that like now those types of things are like, you can have an Instagram where you are looking at all of your queer stuff, and it can be separate from your personal life. So like your personal Instagram, so you're privately able to like explore those conversations. And I definitely think in the mainstream media, like we had a moment for kind of like gay men, and then there's been kind of like a media moment for lesbian couples, and then like in as being characters. And then I think we're kind of in that moment for bisexual characters now, where a lot of it starts off being kind of like hyper depictions of like, this is what, like, you know, Jack from Will and Grace being like the gay character on television for gay men is like a stereotyped depiction, versus, and then like it kind of starts to be like, oh well, this character is just gay, like it's an unimportant plot, like it's not a plot point, they're going to be in relationships, they will happen to be with same-sex couples. So I think we're kind of in that moment now for bisexuality, where we've gone from like hyper stereotyped or like used for shock value, and we're getting to just be like, oh, that character has dated multiple genders, it's kind of irrelevant.
Yeah, at least in the media that I've consumed, it's relatively new, but I'm seeing a lot more just bi characters that aren't like you said, there for shock value, which is really great. That makes me feel awesome about myself to know that like I'm not here for a shock value. And I also really identify with what you said, Mel, because the first couple times that I plugged into the like overarching LGBTQ Reddit page was right around the time that a lot of argument was going out about difficulties between transgender women and lesbians, and walking into something that, at least on the Reddit platform, was such a war zone. Even when I didn't identify as either one of those labels, was really, really, it kind of put me off for a long time. And I remember after a couple of weeks of seeing those messages pop up over and over and over of people arguing, and it looking just exactly like every other toxic online environment that I'd gone into and tried to establish myself as a bi person, and then got jumped down the throat by people who said they were cisgender and heterosexual, it felt equitable. And after a couple of weeks, I searched out some specific bi pages and was only looking at those. And once I tuned back into the main LGBT page, a lot of those arguments had subsided, and it felt like a much more welcoming space. But just because my first experience with LGBTQ conversation forums was so volatile, it felt even more that it wasn't a space that I could come in and talk to. It was like, oh, this is a place for like the real queers to argue. And it felt so like scary almost to jump into that as a person who's bisexual. It's like, hi, I'm here. I can pass as straight. So do you want to hear my opinion or not? It was really kind of spooky. Alrighty, and then we're learning now that the bisexual community makes up the largest percentage of the LGBTQIA population, but is nearly half as likely to be out as other identities such as lesbian or gay. What are some factors that you have experienced or been exposed to that you think might contribute to this phenomenon?
I mean, I think it's like what we've been talking about, right? Like there's not, or there haven't been people claiming that identity and being like talked about in the media. Like if you think about like Tom Daley, the Olympic swimmer, like he came out as bi and then everyone was like, he's gay. So like even in fairly recent history, like you can see that the media still doesn't treat people talking about, or even just saying like, oh, maybe I might be pansexual or fluid. Like it's still something that doesn't get respectfully discussed. And then I think, you know, like we were saying as well about issues with gatekeeping and like spaces where maybe you don't feel able to be honest about like your identity, or where spaces you wouldn't feel safe if you were like questioning to talk about your identity. And obviously I think a lot of that does come down to visibility. Like I read a really good chapter in a book, I think it's by Sherry Eisner, called oh my gosh, I can't remember the exact title, but it's something like Bi Notes for a Bisexual Revolution. There you go, that's it. And it talks about how when we talk about like privilege and passing, we're talking about invisibility, really. Like if we say like even I said it earlier, like I have the privilege of being able to like go outside with my boyfriend and not get like homophobic abuse, which is like obviously something that is a privilege in the sense that like I'm not having a bad time. That's good, like not saying that at all, but just that like the consequence of that is that I'm not visible, and like that if I went into a space like as I look like now, maybe, you know, talking about like queer visibility, would people read me as queer and all of that kind of stuff, which, you know, is a huge topic and there's so much to say. But I think that that definitely contributes to this kind of fear that some bi people will have in not wanting to be out, both in like heterosexual daily life, you know, you're in the office pretending that you're a good straight person, and then also like in queer spaces, you know, you're in that kind of in-between space where you may not feel comfortable in either environment.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the combination of the ability to be invisible, whether that's intentional or not, and the messaging we've got about how bisexuality is not a legitimate sexuality or sexual identity turns some people off. I think there's also something to be said for when you're going into LGBT spaces, feeling like you're the most watered down version of all the identities represented there, and that even if the B is the biggest part of that acronym, it's the least powerful one somehow. I don't know how we got that message or how I got it. I don't know. You might feel differently, but it is how I've always felt walking into, you know, the LGBT plus resource center in Brooklyn or at the queer club in college. Like, I feel not as powerful as the rest of those identities. Maybe it's a me problem. I don't know.
I wonder too if, I mean, obviously there's just like everything both Mel and Annie said is like 100% accurate. But also the fact that like, we don't have a ton of research on LGBTQ issues anyway. So these numbers are self-reported, not only from like, it's like people who are already coming to the, like, identifying as a member of the community. And I feel like experiences that I've heard of where it's like you're a person who identifies as gay or lesbian, but like maybe internally you're like, and there's maybe like 1 or 2 times that I feel like maybe I'm bi. Like, I feel like you might not explore the B or claim that identity because it might not feel right. It's kind of like the same, I feel like the same thing, like we are the largest population, but I don't know if I'm adding anything. I feel like it's like it's just a hard label to claim because of that like concept of the bicycle, that you're either like in the moment I'm attracted to this person who's like masculine presenting or male identifying, and so I'm like, okay, like right this second I feel straight, and then you know a lovely femme presenting person walks by and you're like, oh, like okay, and maybe those moments are months and months apart, so it's hard to like fall into that space unless you're feeling like you're really like delving into that identity. So I feel like sometimes it's just maybe it feels simpler if you're constantly feeling this like tug in multiple directions to be like, oh well, like it's been pretty consistently this way. So I think because there's like a lack of regular research, that kind of like fluid flow maybe gets less. I'm basically saying I think way more than 40%.
Yeah, I agree with everything you all said. I think it's like, it could very well be way more than 40%. And coming from a space where I've done research in the past and like gone through all like the research related statistics classes and how to conduct research, I remember hearing for the first time why we don't have a whole lot of research about women's reproductive health, and just the fact that we have hormonal fluctuations and that we can become pregnant makes it so difficult, not really that difficult, to have data that doesn't need to be thrown out. And I think the bisexual experience and the bicycle, like you're talking about, is one of those things that researchers might see and get scared away from. Like, I can't write an IRB for all of these people and have half of their data thrown out because halfway through the study they like a man, or I don't understand how to quantify or qualify any of these different factors that are part of my research because there's any type of fluctuation there. The precedent that we have to have such stable data sets is great because that's how you do any kind of statistical analysis, but it makes it difficult for anyone who's not exactly clear-cut one thing in any sense of the word to get any good data on themselves. And it's really tough when you come from any community that has any sort of data fluctuation like that. All right. And then what inspired you all to create content for the LGBTQ community?
For me, I think it was just a case of like, so I have this really clear memory of being like, I really wish someone would start an Instagram account that talks about bisexual history. And like, I thought that for quite a while, and I even said to one of my friends, I was like, oh, when is someone going to do that? And then I was like, oh, guess I'll do it then. Like, and I'm really glad I did. It's been like the most positive thing. I was really scared of doing it initially because I thought everyone would yell at me and tell me that I was like appropriating lesbian and gay history, or that I was like applying a label to people who wouldn't have used that label and all of that stuff. But I've actually never had anything like that. Everyone is always super nice. And it just feels like a really positive thing. It was also really important for me, I think, I wanted to do more than just be like, hello, I'm bi, which is, totally fine if that's all people want to do. But I was like, I want to have like affirm my identity more actively, and also like hopefully contribute something to other people. And this just felt like a way to do that I could do without kind of having to make it about me too much. Like I can distance myself from it if I want to. And also that like for me, history is like a really important way to understand myself, like learning about like what other people or cultures and societies have done. And so to like now have examples of people who like have nothing in common with me at all, but other than the fact that they were like experiencing attraction or having relationships with people of the same and different genders, and that was just like a really cool feeling, and it's just so fun to share that with people. It makes me really happy.
It's a great Instagram. I got to
Thank you.
I got to be the person who searched on Instagram BiHistory, and it was there because you made.
I'm so happy.
I made the podcast because of Rose. Rose was like, podcast, and I was like, I'm in.
Yeah, I was like newly feeling validated in my bisexuality. And I was like really starting to dive into like a lot more queer content creators. And for me, I was very into podcasts, and I was like, all right, well, like, of course there's going to be bisexual podcasts because there's all these podcasts for just LGBT people, or no B. And I looked and I was like, oh, there's like a few that are from a younger demographic, which is obviously like not, I mean, not being ageist or anything, but like for me, I was like, oh, somebody who's kind of in high school talking about their experience being bi is going to have a slightly different experience than me. And a lot of them were like one episode that had never really been like consistently updated. And now, even since we started doing the podcast last summer, there's like 5 or 6 bisexual focused podcasts that have come out in that time period. So I think it was really like a moment where I'm definitely not the only person who was like, bisexual. Oh, there's not any like high quality, consistently coming out podcasts. And I was going to message Annie and ask like, do you know any bi podcasts? And then I was like, you know what? Annie makes podcasts. We should just make one. Like, let's do it.
Yeah, I remember when I first started looking for bisexual content was about 2 or 3 years ago. But I didn't start actively really delving into what was out there until I took this position and started trying to post highlights every week of stuff from the queer community, and trying to find stuff for the bisexual part of our club and our general campus community was super, super hard. And the HelloGoodBis podcast was one of the first things I found. The bystanders episode is something that I tell every single one of my friends about. I told my therapist about it, so she's sending it out to all the people who, like, lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, just anybody who needs to know how to be supported when they're coming out. I think it's a great resource, so thank you guys so much, especially for that episode. And the BiHistory account was one of the first real accounts that I found where I could get any sort of good information on just individuals to feature. I remember getting so excited to find your account because I was like, yes, it's like 7 at night. I want to go to bed. I have class tomorrow. I need to post this highlight, and it's already here for me. Thank you. Yeah, and I've been able to revisit your content and find new people to feature when I'm really struggling and can't find somebody. And especially, like, it's so hard to find any media on LGBTQ people, which I've like discovered after, I think I'm on my 8th Pride Light now. I used to post them every other week, and for this month I've been posting them every week. And just trying to find stuff week to week has been a struggle. So it's really, really exciting that the community is really coming forth and rallying and starting to make more content for each other, because it's great to be like queer characters in media and stuff, but if you don't have any content that's made by queer people for people who are of the same identity, it can be really discouraging. And then in my personal experience, a sense of community brought on by physically being with other people, socialization, and having proximity to other LGBTQ individuals was really crucial to feeling supported. And have you guys struggled with feeling connected with the community since the outbreak?
Yeah, definitely. Like, I feel like somebody who goes clubbing a lot more than I do should write an article about like how that is such a big part of, for me, where I live anyway, like my community. Like, there's people who I maybe don't see that often, but like I'll see them if we go to like these specific nights that are like queer and wonderful. And like I really miss that feeling of like going into a space and being like, I'm wearing like my leather trousers and I look quite silly, but I'm having a really fun time, and I know that everyone here is like on board with that. Like, that's the vibe. It's cool. And also, like, you know, the more serious stuff as well, like meetups like by Glasgow, and all the kind of all of that stuff that obviously would normally be happening. Like, I'm not going to say I went to all of it because, you know, I didn't, but, you know, it makes me feel sad to think that those things aren't happening. But I think also the way that we've moved. So I also work at Glasgow Zine Library, and we've moved all of our programming online, and like seeing how people respond, like the attendance we have for like film screenings now is way what we would have if we were doing something in a physical space. And like, obviously in terms of access, like if you have a disability that maybe like might make you not able to attend something in person, having like it available in that way has been really powerful. So I think I'm like half super sad, obviously, and obviously like stressed and scared and all of that stuff, but also there has been like a small bit of joy in seeing like how we can build community. And actually I think that maybe hopefully that will make us more aware of what we can do. Like, you know, you don't have to live in the same city, you don't have to have a physical event for something to be meaningful and powerful, and that hopefully that will enable kind of more by community building and, you know, more general community building as well.
Yeah, I think it's been a minute since my clubbing days. So I haven't really done the like in-person queer community activities, except for going to the Queer Resource Center in Brooklyn when I was living there. But when I started looking at what other people were doing during quarantine to stay connected, I kind of realized that a lot of queer stuff had already moved online. I think a lot more people meet sexual partners or romantic partners or friends on apps like Grindr or Lex or whatever dating app you're using, Bumble, Tinder. So that's good and bad, right? Because gay bars need patrons to stay in business. And gay bars are an essential part of our history. So it prompted me to look up how the first gay bar that I ever went to was doing financially, and they're really troubled. I think they were not making a lot of money before this, and they're definitely not making a lot of money now, which is heartbreaking because that was a transformative place for me, and I made a lot of friends and memories there. So it's really hard. I think if you have a special place like that, check in on them. A lot of them are doing fundraisers. Shout out to Studio 13 in Iowa City, Iowa. If you have the means, please please donate to their GoFundMe. The idea of it not existing anymore, it freaks me out so bad. I can't let that place not exist anymore. Yeah, especially queer bars in more rural communities. Very important. I do think there are some cool things happening online. There are a few weekly dance parties that I found, which are a great option for people who are no longer of club going age. Not that that's not you can go to the club at any age, but if you feel like you're too old for the club, Instagram dance parties are a great way to go because you can wear whatever you want and you don't have to put on any makeup. I mean, maybe you feel like you, I don't know, but it's a much more casual feel. I was looking through my phone because I follow all these accounts that advertise the like Zoom parties, but I can't find it. So I'll have to message you with those later.
One I know of is Social Distance, and that is I think specifically queer. At least that's how I came across it. Dance party, and they do Tuesday, Friday, and Sunday. So there's like a variety of times, but it's very like feel good. Make like you can be as dressed up or as casual as possible. I am also I don't drink, so I'm not a contributor to the queer bar scene in New York, but this has definitely made me feel like I want to prioritize the events that those spaces put on that aren't necessarily drinking specific. There's like a queer karaoke at Come On Everybody that's like 4 feet from my apartment, and I never went before just out of like, oh, like I'll go next time, and now I'm like, no, I need to be like showing up to these spaces if I'm interested in them existing for the benefit of other people. But also to note that like in New York, like the by request meetings have gone digital. A lot of the Brooklyn Pride Center's programming has gone digital. So it is still existing, but I just feel like it makes me value in-person spaces so much more than I was before. Kind of taking advantage of them in a way that I hadn't is definitely like hopefully coming in the future when the time is right. Probably. But I like fully agree with what Annie said as well, that like rural spaces are probably much more vulnerable. So like New York City, I feel even if specific locations break down, that kind of space for queer representation will always be such a huge part of New York City's identity. So I think it's a great idea to like look up the Iowa City queer space, or ask your friends who are in like Minnesota, like where do you go, and can I throw a couple bucks to them if you're able.
Yeah, it's funny. I would give my left butt cheek to go to some sweaty, people-filled club right now. I would give anything. I would love that. I haven't felt that way since I was a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing I wouldn't do.
Yeah, I'm like, I just want to see the Showtime performers on the subway. I want them to almost kick me in the face. I'm so ready.
Oh my gosh, I feel the same way. I am an insufferable introvert, and I have some friends in the Haight who are taking me to our most well-known, mostly female but queer bar called Jolene's, and they were one of the first people I checked in on, and they're doing cocktail delivery. They give you hand sanitizer and a cocktail kit and gay-ass water. And it was so exciting to see that they're doing well, because a lot of the spaces, even before the pandemic, that me and my friends went to in the city are suffering from incredibly high property taxes in San Francisco and incredibly high, I think it's the taxes on their alcohol licenses that are also contributing to how difficult it is for them to stay open and feature local bands and feature just local creatives, because, you know, they don't always bring in the most money, and like most of the money should be going to them, because otherwise we can't support our creative community. And so many places are closing. So it's good to see that there are a lot of digital things that are happening that are keeping people connected and keeping our community supported. Alrighty, and then we're going to get into our last few questions. I know we're running low on time. What do you like most about being part of the LGBTQ community and being bi specifically?
I kind of mentioned this, but I really think I would be like a much shitter person if I hadn't had to think so intensely about who I am. Like the amount of like introspection and like self-analysis, not that I'm saying I think I'm a great person by any means, but you know, like I've spent a lot of time working on myself to understand who I am. And I'm very, although I wish like that we lived in a world where I hadn't had to do that, I am still grateful for that, because I feel like I understand myself in a way that like I think some straight people don't ever really have to think about. And like that sucks for them. And I also, yeah, just feel like very proud to be part of a community that has so many amazing and interesting and wonderful people in, and that has a history of like people caring about doing the right thing and doing it even like at a detriment to themselves, which is like, you know, if I could only hope to be like half as good as that, then that would be something.
Yeah, I agree. I think the history of the queer community is so fascinating and so incredibly big. And a big part of that history is the concept of found families. And when you come out, if you're looking for a family at that point, you'll find it with other queer people. They will take you in, and that's incredibly powerful and beautiful to me. I think it's my favorite thing about being in this community.
I would echo what both Mel and Annie said. And just in like a little way, like walking down the street and holding my girlfriend's hand and seeing someone like across the street like look at us and just see like pure joy in their face that they're like, look at that happy queer couple. And like I know I do that where I'm just like, oh yes, like it's so nice to see that, and just have like an underground like network of support. Obviously I'm not like, hey, what's on, me too, but it's just nice to like feel that sense of community even when you're not in person connecting, especially while social distancing. Like being able to see people having that experience, it's just so important.
Yeah, I agree with all of those too. Those are some of my favorite things. I know my queer friends were some of the first people in social distancing to say, hey, let's set up a Zoom meeting, let's hang out. Like we're so used to having to find connection in alternative ways that I feel like we've been really resilient during this time. And Mel, you mentioned earlier your leopard pants, and that kind of relates to one of my favorite parts of the queer community is that I like wearing all kind of random anything, whatever I can find on the thrift store shelves that looks like the strangest thing out there. And I think being able to find that as being part of the queer community, you're allowed to present and dress and like adorn yourself in whatever way, and you will be supported, is really fun, because I feel like there are a lot of communities out there, like most communities are so rigid in terms of like wear your suit, wear your tie, wear your pencil skirt, and that's all that we're going to accept you in. And another friend of mine was talking about how she had no one to share her bi outfits with now that there's no one to go and, you know, peacock in front of. And I like really identified with that, because it's so much fun to get in a queer space and everyone is you can tell like fully being their purest self, whatever that may be, like sweatshirt and jeans or full glitter onesie. I really love that. I think it's a lot of fun. And then what advice would you give your young pre-out self and others who are new to the community?
I think I spent a lot of my young years just being like very worried and feeling like I really had to work everything out, and I would just say chill out, man, like it's fine, you'll get there. Like, and I think that there are so many wonderful resources now available that weren't when I was younger, and like that wasn't even that long ago, so I can only imagine like hopefully what there will be in future. And I hope that I can be part of that like resource building and like community building, so that people don't have to feel like scared and isolated because of who they are, or worried that they won't be accepted. And yeah.
Yeah, I would say be kind. You know, no one's cruel for no reason. So be doubly kind with anyone who's cruel to you. And if you're going to be cruel to yourself, be 3 times as kind when you can. Because you know, it's hard to be nice to yourself. So be kind to yourself and other people as well.
I would say like turn into the curiosity instead of turning away, because I think I spent a lot of time feeling like that like the feelings the like the interest in more than just a heteronormative existence, and like that just feeling of queerness was an unusual thing. And I felt like it wasn't, since I didn't wake up and feel like, yes, I'm a lesbian and I'm coming out today, I've figured it all out and I'm ready to do it. I felt like that kind of in between wasn't enough. But if I had, instead of being like, okay, well, that's a part of me that has like some interest and curiosity and queerness going on, I'll leave that over here because it's not enough, and just like focus on the straight parts of me, and the parts that kind of align with expectations. That if I had just like taken that curiosity and brought it into research and allowing myself to go into queer spaces earlier, I probably would have felt a lot happier a lot sooner and done a lot less of self-sabotaging self-abuse and running away. So just like hug your curiosity and take it with you where you go.
Be kind, be curious, take care of yourself. And who are your favorite LGBTQ creatives, advocates, and or content creators, and why?
I should definitely have done more homework for this one. Oh no. There's an organization in London called Biscuit. They are This Is Biscuit on Twitter, and I just really enjoy. I think they hit like a very good spot of like activism without like shouting at people for no reason, and you know, talking about stuff that's important. There's also an organization in London called London by Pandas that do a lot of like direct action, and I keep telling myself that one day I'm gonna have the guts to like set something up like that in Glasgow, because I think it's so important, and like everything they do makes me wish I did more for other people and was not so scared of getting in trouble. But yeah, they're super cool and do a lot of super cool important stuff, and I'm sure in like 10 minutes I'll think of loads more people, but that's all I can think of right now.
Yeah, I also should have studied up. We have a brother podcast. I feel comfortable calling them that, called Two Bi Guys, which is a podcast about the male bisexual experience, and the female. They have a lot of great guests on. So that's a great resource if you're looking for, you know, the male bi experience. They're two very cool guys, Rob and Alex. I have been reading a lot recently. I bought Rose for Christmas, I got her a great graphic novel called On a Sunbeam. I just blanked on the title. By Tillie Walden. It's a really beautiful, teenage queer love story. And we just had a guest on, a friend of mine who's a writer. She was talking about a book that she really enjoyed by Melissa Febos called Abandon Me. I just started reading it. Fantastic. She talks about, her loves over the years. And it's an awesome book. So yeah, those are some of my favorites.
Also didn't do any research, but I spent like all day Monday following What's Wrong with Molly Margaret's Instagram stories. Her Instagram really focuses on like very like therapeutic, like get in touch with yourself and how to communicate best with other people. With a focus on like queer identity and queer spaces. And then not to let Annie one up me, but I sent her a graphic book too, Queer Graphic History by Meg John Barker and Julia Scheel. It's excellent and it's drawn, so you can kind of look up any topic that you're curious about, and it's a great like very easy entry into queer theory, because as someone who like had no exposure to queer theory at all in high school or college or independently, I was like, it seems very scary to go into a research database and be like, queer theory, please. So this is a great way to talk about like concepts you're already probably familiar with, and like those ideas and where they came from and who first coined terms, and kind of is like a great starting point to do your own research. And I love it. It's just super accessible.
One of my favorites is The ABCs of LGBT by Hardell, and their YouTube channel is wonderful. Ash and their partner are just so sweet, so wonderful. And they have a lot of content on exploring identity and exploring sexuality that is really, really interesting to me. So love them, check them out if you would like. And that's all the questions we have. Thank you guys so much for participating. I'm going to stop recording.
Thank you.